Welcome to our channel, your gateway to the most spine-chilling tales and unnerving true stories. Today, we present a true story, terrifying camping encounter, a horror story. The first whispers of dawn painted the sky with soft, pink strokes as Alex, Ryan, and Jamie pulled into the gravel parking lot of the remote camping site. Their college days had drawn to a close, leaving a bittersweet taste of nostalgia in the air. This weekend camping trip was Jamie's brainchild, a last hurrah before the responsibilities of the real world claimed them. A chance to reconnect with nature, with each other, and with the simpler times of their youth. The drive had been long, the laughter and music from the car stereo echoing through the darkened forest like ghosts of their past. They stepped out into the crisp morning, stretching cramped muscles and breathing in the sweet scent of dew-kissed pine needles. The forest loomed around them, a tapestry of towering trees and shadowy underbrush that whispered secrets as the sun began to rise. Jamie, the most experienced of the trio, had chosen the spot. They had been friends since their awkward, pimply-faced freshman year and had shared countless adventures. Yet, there was something about this place that made even Jamie's eyes sparkle with excitement. "Guys, this is it," Jamie announced, gesturing to the trailhead with a wide smile. "We're going to have the best weekend of our lives." Alex, the skeptical one, arched an eyebrow. "You say that every time we go camping, but this time, I mean it," Jamie insisted, nudging Alex playfully. Ryan, the ever-optimistic peacemaker, clapped his hands together. "Let's get our gear and hit the trail. The sooner we set up camp, the more we can enjoy before it gets hot." They gathered their supplies, the clank of pans and rustle of sleeping bags punctuating the early morning silence. The hiking was steep, but not unmanageable, the trail winding through the dense foliage like a serpent eager to reveal its treasure. The forest grew quieter as they ventured deeper, the only sounds the crunch of their boots on the path and the occasional bird call. As they approached the clearing where they planned to set up camp, they noticed a peculiar sight. At the edge of the forest, a group of figures dressed in hunting gear stood in a loose formation, their faces obscured by the shadows of their caps. Hunting was out of season, and the sight of these strangers sent a shiver down their collective spines. They paused, watching the hunters from a safe distance. The figures were eerily still, as if they had been carved from the very woods that surrounded them. There was something off about their stance, their attire. The silence was thick, a muffled blanket that seemed to swallow their uneasy whispers. Alex broke the tension. "Maybe they're just locals doing some target practice or something." Ryan squinted. "But it's not even hunting season." Jamie's smile faded. "Let's just keep moving. We don't want to startle them." They proceeded cautiously, their laughter replaced by hushed tones as they approached the clearing. The hunters remained stationary, unmoving, as if they were part of the landscape itself. Then, as if sensing their presence, the figures turned and disappeared into the woods, leaving no trace of their passing. The friends exchanged puzzled glances. "That was weird," Alex murmured. Jamie shrugged it off. "Probably just some guys playing a prank or something." They set up camp, their spirits not entirely dampened by the mysterious encounter. The day passed in a blur of setting up tents, gathering firewood, and preparing a meal that was more smoke than sustenance. They shared stories, reminisced about old times, and talked about their hopes and fears for the future. The mysterious figures were a fleeting memory, forgotten in the warmth of their camaraderie. Nightfall brought a chill to the air, and they huddled around the crackling fire, the flickering light casting monstrous shadows on their faces. They spoke in hushed tones, the darkness a comforting blanket that encouraged secrets and whispers. Ryan leaned in, his voice barely audible over the pop of the fire. "You guys ever heard of the Huntsman of Hollow Ridge?" Alex rolled his eyes. "Don't start with your campfire stories, Ryan." But Jamie leaned forward, curiosity piqued. "What's that?" Ryan took a dramatic pause. "They say that a group of hunters got lost in these woods decades ago. During a blizzard, they turned on each other, resorting to cannibalism to survive. Now, their spirits roam the forest, dressed in their tattered hunting gear, searching for lost souls to join their eternal hunt." Alex snorted. That's ridiculous. Jamie, however, grew serious. You know, I heard something similar from an old-timer at the ranger station. Something about a cursed hunting ground. A twig snapped in the darkness beyond the firelight, and all three men jumped. They exchanged nervous glances, the laughter dying on their lips. The forest had grown quieter, the usual night sounds muffled by an unseen presence. Let's not talk about that, Alex suggested, his voice shaking slightly. But the seeds of unease had been planted, and as they lay in their tents that night, the whispers of the wind played tricks with their imagination, turning into the rustle of leaves into the footsteps of ghostly hunters. The next day dawned bright and clear, the strange encounter forgotten in the light of day. They fished in the nearby stream, the sun casting dappled patterns on the water surface as the fish swam beneath their feet. They explored the woods, finding hidden waterfalls and ancient, moss-covered ruins that spoke of a time long forgotten. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they returned to camp, weary but exhilarated. They cooked dinner with renewed enthusiasm, the smell of roasting marshmallows mingling with the scent of the pine-infused air. But as the stars began to emerge, one by one, the atmosphere grew tense again. The fire cast shadows that danced in a way that seemed almost alive, and the whispers of the wind grew louder, more insistent. They heard it first as a distant howl, a mournful sound that seemed to carry the weight of the forest's secrets. Then, the rustling grew closer, the crunch of leaves underfoot becoming unmistakable. The three friends froze, their hearts hammering in their chests. The figures from the day before emerged from the shadows, their eyes gleaming in the firelight. They were indeed dressed as hunters, but their gear was antique, their faces twisted into grotesque masks of pain and hunger. Alex's hand shot to the campfire, grabbing a burning brand. What do you want? The figures did not speak, only gestured for the friends to follow. The trio stumbled backward, their eyes wide with fear. Let's get out of here, Jamie whispered urgently. They broke into a run, their footsteps thundering through the night as the unearthly figures pursued them. The forest seemed to come alive with the sound of their panic, the branches reaching out like gnarled fingers to snatch at their clothes. They didn't stop until they reached the parking lot, their lungs burning and their legs trembling with exhaustion. The headlights of their car seemed like beacons of safety, and they dove inside, slamming the doors shut. In the quiet of the car, their breaths coming in ragged gasps, they realized the hunters had vanished as suddenly as they had appeared. The drive home was fraught with tension, the radio's static the only sound as they hurtled through the darkened countryside. They dropped Jamie off last, his house the furthest from the college town they had all shared. As they pulled away, Alex and Ryan watched in the rearview mirror as their friend disappeared into his house, the porch light casting a lonely glow into the night. In the days that followed, they tried to convince themselves it was a trick of the light, a shared hallucination brought on by exhaustion and too much campfire whiskey. But the feeling of being watched lingered, a cold touch at the base of their necks that refused to dissipate. Their weekend of bonding had turned into a tale of terror, the forest's embrace now feeling more like a prison. The ill-timed retreat had left them with more than just memories. It had planted a seed of doubt in the very fabric of their reality. The canvas of night sky was adorned with a smattering of stars as the trio of college friends, Alex, Ryan, and Jamie, nestled into their camping site for the night. The air was thick with the scent of pine and earth, and the crackling of the campfire served as a comforting lullaby to the end of their first day's adventure. The distant echoes of their laughter and the stories they shared during the journey had given way to the soothing whispers of the wind playing with the leaves of the towering trees that surrounded them. The only light emanated from the flickering embers of the fire, casting long, dancing shadows across the clearing. Alex, the most introspective of the group, lay in her sleeping bag, staring into the canopy of stars above, her thoughts drifting to the mysterious figures they had encountered earlier that day. Dressed in archaic hunting garb, they had moved through the forest with a silent grace that seemed almost otherworldly. Despite the campfire's warm embrace, a chill of unease had snaked its way down her spine, and she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Ryan, ever the skeptic, had dismissed her concerns with a hearty laugh. "You've been watching too many horror flicks, Alex," he teased, poking at the fire with a stick. "They're probably just locals playing some kind of historical reenactment." Jamie, the one who had suggested the spot, had nodded in agreement. "This place is known for its weird traditions. Remember that time we heard about the Ghost Town Festival?" But the smile Alex had forced at their banter had not reached her eyes. She had a gut feeling that something was amiss, something that didn't quite fit with the idyllic serenity of their retreat. The first twig snapped under the weight of unseen footsteps. The trio's conversation hushed as they strained to listen. It was the quiet that follows a disturbance in nature, the silence that screams something is not right. The campfire's whispers grew louder, the crackling sound seemingly amplified in the sudden hush. Alex sat bolt upright, her heart hammering in her chest. She nudged her friends, who followed suit, eyes wide with alarm. "Did you guys hear that?" she hissed, her voice barely audible. Ryan and Jamie exchanged glances, their laughter from earlier now replaced with the stark reality of the night's unnerving sounds. They nodded, listening intently as the nocturnal symphony grew more complex with each passing moment. The rustling of leaves grew closer, the crunch of gravel underfoot grew louder, and the faint murmur of voices became discernible whispers. "We should check it out," said Ryan, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hand as he reached for the flashlight. They moved as one, slipping on their shoes and grabbing their flashlights, their eyes glued to the perimeter of the camp. The forest was a wall of darkness, and the shadows danced menacingly with each step they took towards the source of the sounds. The whispers grew clearer, hinting at a conversation in a language none of them could quite place, yet it held an ancient, haunting melody. The footsteps grew bolder, the rustling of leaves more pronounced, as if the unseen figures were taunting them, leading them deeper into the woods. The trio followed, their flashlights piercing the darkness like the eyes of predators hunting their prey. The trees grew denser, the underbrush more tangled, as the path grew less and less familiar. The whispers grew into a cacophony of voices, echoing through the thicket. The air grew colder, the hairs on their necks standing on end as the sense of being watched grew almost palpable. The trio tightened their grip on their flashlights, the beams cutting through the inky blackness like the beams of lighthouses in a stormy sea. Alex stopped abruptly, her eyes fixed on something in the distance. "Look," she breathed, pointing to a clearing ahead. Emerging from the shadows, the figures took shape. They were indeed dressed as hunters from a bygone era, their faces obscured by the foliage of the forest. They moved with a synchronized grace, performing a ritualistic dance around a totem that stood tall in the center of the clearing. The carvings on the wooden statue were crude, but filled with a primal energy that seemed to pulse in time with their whispers. The figures didn't appear to have noticed the intrusion, their focus solely on their macabre dance. The trio watched, transfixed by the scene playing out before them. The whispers grew louder, the dance more frenzied, until it reached a crescendo. The figures stopped, their eyes, now glowing with an eerie luminescence, turned towards the campers. Panic set in. The three friends sprinted back towards their camp, the whispers and the echo of their own footsteps the only sounds in the forest. Their hearts pounded in their chests as they stumbled over roots and rocks, the darkness seemingly closing in around them. The flashlights cast erratic shadows, creating a disorienting maze of light and dark. As they neared the camp, the whispers grew faint, the footsteps retreating into the distance. They collapsed into the safety of their camp, panting and trembling. The fire had burned low, casting a warm glow that seemed to ward off the cold that had seeped into their bones. They sat in silence, the reality of what they had witnessed too overwhelming to put into words. Alex spoke first, her voice shaking. "We need to leave." Ryan and Jamie nodded, their eyes still wide with fear. But as they began to pack up their gear, they realized that their unease had turned to a morbid curiosity. What had they stumbled upon? Was it a prank gone too far, or something far more sinister? They decided to stay, to unravel the mystery of the whispers in the thicket. But as they lay in their sleeping bags, the forest around them seemingly alive with the echoes of the whispers. They couldn't shake the feeling that they had just become part of a much larger, much more terrifying story. The next day, they ventured into the nearby town, seeking answers from the locals. They found a town steeped in tradition, with tales of the woods that painted a picture of a place where the veil between worlds grew thin. The whispers they heard were said to be the echoes of lost souls, a warning to those who dared to trespass. But it was the old woman in the dusty bookstore who spoke of a forbidden ceremony, one that had not been performed in generations. Her eyes grew dark as she spoke of the hunters, the guardians of the forest, whose whispers called forth ancient spirits to maintain the balance of the land. Intrigued yet wary, the friends decided to delve deeper, to find the truth behind the whispers. They gathered information, piecing together a puzzle that grew more complex with each new revelation. As the night fell on their second day, they prepared themselves for what they believed was to come. The whispers grew louder as the moon reached its zenith. The figures once again approached, their dance more frenetic, their eyes burning with a fiercer light. The trio watched from the shadows, hidden by the very darkness that seemed to fuel the hunters' power. As the ritual reached its climax, something shifted in the air. The whispers grew into a cacophony, and the ground beneath them trembled. A shadowy figure, larger than any of the hunters, emerged from the forest, a creature of nightmares with antlers that scraped the sky. The creature's gaze fell upon the campers, and the whispers grew silent. The hunters turned, their eyes now upon the trespassers. The air grew thick with tension, the very fabric of reality seeming to warp around them. With a roar that shook the trees, the creature charged. The hunters moved swiftly, surrounding the trio in a protective formation. The creature halted, seemingly confused by the hunters' intervention. The leader of the hunters stepped forward, speaking in the same ancient tongue they had heard the night before. To their amazement, the creature bowed its head, retreating back into the forest. The hunters turned to the campers, their expressions unreadable behind their masks of leaves and bark. They gestured for the trio to leave, their whispers now a gentle urging. As they stumbled back to their camp, the whispers grew softer, the figures melting back into the thicket. The forest had changed, no longer a tranquil sanctuary, but a place of hidden dangers and ancient pacts. The campfire burned low once more, the whispers of the night a constant reminder of the secrets the woods held. As dawn broke, the trio made the decision to leave, their weekend retreat having turned into a journey into the heart of a living legend. The whispers in the thicket had led them to a discovery that would forever change their understanding of the world, of the delicate balance between the natural and the supernatural. The whispers had become a part of them, a haunting reminder that sometimes the most terrifying stories are those that hold a grain of truth. Their friendship, forged in the crucible of fear and wonder, had grown stronger. As they packed up their gear and hiked back to civilization, they knew they would never forget the whispers that had called to them from the heart of the forest. The morning after the unsettling encounter with the vanishing figures, the trio of friends, Alex, Ryan, and Jamie, awoke to the gentle whispers of the river and the chirping of the early birds. The serene beauty of the campsite offered a stark contrast to the eerie feeling that had settled in the pit of their stomachs the previous night. They gathered around the smoldering campfire, the flames casting an orange glow on their sleep-deprived faces, sipping on lukewarm coffee and nibbling at breakfast bars. "I can't shake off the feeling that we're not alone out here," Alex said, her voice trembling slightly as she recounted the footsteps she had heard the night before. Ryan, the most skeptical of the group, tried to reassure her. "It's probably just animals, Alex. You know how sounds can play tricks on you in the woods." But Jamie, the one with the most camping experience, looked thoughtful. "It's true that we're in the middle of nowhere, but something about those figures, they didn't seem right." The discussion was cut short by the discovery of an unusual path. It began at the river's edge, obscured by overgrown ferns and brambles that seemed to have been parted with deliberate care. The path was faint, as though it had been used recently, yet not enough to leave a clear trail. Intrigued and slightly nervous, they decided to investigate. They packed their backpacks with essentials, water, flashlights, a first aid kit, and a few snacks, and set off down the path. The sun dappled through the dense canopy above, casting a mottled pattern of light and shadow on the forest floor. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and moss. The three friends walked in a tight line, their footsteps muffled by the soft, spongy underbrush. The path grew narrower and the vegetation more oppressive, closing in around them a living maze. They had to push aside branches and duck under vines that seemed to hang with a purposeful malice. As they ventured deeper, the sounds of the river grew fainter, replaced by the murmur of distant whispers that seemed to emanate from the very trees themselves. After what felt like hours, they stumbled upon a clearing. At the center stood a massive, ancient oak tree, its trunk twisted and gnarled, as though it had borne witness to centuries of secrets. The sight that greeted them was haunting. A series of ancient symbols, etched with a precision that suggested an unsettling knowledge of the forest, adorned the tree's lower trunk. The symbols were a mishmash of what looked like runes and hieroglyphs, none of which they recognized. They approached with a mix of fascination and trepidation, reaching out to trace the grooves with trembling fingers. The bark was cold and damp, as though the very tree itself was weeping. The clearing grew colder, the whispers grew louder, and the shadows grew darker. Their hearts pounded in their chests, as they felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched. The hairs on the back of their necks stood on end, and they spun around, searching for the source of the unease. But the forest remained still, the only movement the rustling of leaves in the breeze. Ryan broke the silence. "Guys, we should head back. This place is giving me the creeps." But Alex was captivated by the symbols. "We can't just leave without figuring out what this means," she said, her voice a mix of excitement and fear. "These could be warnings, or something important." Jamie nodded. "Let's keep going, but stay alert." They pushed through the dense foliage that surrounded the clearing, the path now barely discernible. The whispers grew to a crescendo, and then abruptly ceased. The silence was deafening. They walked for what felt like miles, their breaths coming in shallow gasps, until they stumbled upon the shrine. The makeshift shrine was nestled in a small depression in the earth, surrounded by a ring of toadstools that glowed faintly in the gloom. It was a macabre sight, a mishmash of objects arranged with a disturbing symmetry. There were animal bones, feathers, and shiny trinkets, all laid out in a pattern that suggested a twisted reverence. But it was the human artifacts that sent a chill down their spines. A torn piece of fabric that looked like it had been ripped from clothing, a shoe, and a small, crumpled piece of paper with writing too faded to make out. They stood in awe, their eyes wide with horror. "We need to get out of here," Ryan whispered, his voice barely audible. But as they turned to leave, they heard a twig snap. They whirled around, expecting to see the mysterious figures from the night before. Instead, they found themselves face to face with a group of locals, dressed in ragged clothes, their eyes wild with a fervor that spoke of madness or something far worse. The leader, a man with a thick beard and a crazed glint in his eye, stepped forward. "You've found our sanctuary," he said, his voice a hoarse rasp. "You shouldn't have come here." The trio took a step back, their hearts racing. "We didn't mean to," Jamie stuttered. "We're just passing through." The man's eyes narrowed. "You've seen the offerings. You know what we do." The three friends exchanged panicked glances. They had stumbled upon something they were never meant to see. Something that hinted at dark, ancient rituals and sacrifices. "You will join us," the leader continued, his followers closing in, their expressions a mix of anticipation and hostility. "You will become part of the cycle." Alex's mind raced. "Look, we're just tourists," she said, her voice shaking. "We don't know anything about this." The leader laughed, a sound that sent shivers down their spines. "You know enough. The forest has chosen you." In a flash, the friends realized the gravity of their situation. They had to escape. Pounding the earth as they raced back the way they had come. The locals pursued them, their cries echoing through the trees. The chase was relentless. They could hear the crunch of leaves and the snap of branches behind them, growing louder with every second. Their legs burned, their lungs screamed for air, but they didn't dare slow down. The path grew more treacherous, the underbrush thicker, but they pushed on, driven by fear. As they neared the river, the sound of rushing water grew louder. They saw their camp in the distance, a beacon of safety, but their pursuers were gaining ground. In a desperate move, Ryan dashed into the river, the cold water shocking his system. He urged the others to follow. "Swim. They won't be able to follow us." They plunged into the water, the current tugging at them. The locals reached the river's edge, but they didn't follow. Instead, they watched with a silent, almost reverent, intensity as the three friends disappeared around the bend. Exhausted and freezing, the trio dragged themselves onto the riverbank, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. They had escaped the clutches of the unseen observers, but at what cost? The camp was abandoned, their gear left behind. They had no choice but to keep moving, to find help, and to unravel the mystery of the shrine, and the people who had built it. As they stumbled away from the river, the whispers in the thicket grew faint, the symbols on the trees fading into the shadows. But the horror of what they had found lingered, a haunting reminder that some secrets are better left untouched. Their weekend trip had turned into a fight for survival, a journey into the heart of a darkness they never knew existed. They had uncovered a secret that was not meant for outsiders, and now they had to live with the consequences. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the forest in an eerie twilight. They had no idea how far they had come, or how much farther they had to go. But one thing was clear, the real adventure had only just begun. The sky above the dense canopy of the forest was a canvas of fiery oranges and deep purples as the sun dipped below the horizon. Alex, Ryan, and Jamie huddled around the flickering campfire, the flames casting an eerie dance of light and shadow across their nervous faces. The air was thick with the scent of wood smoke and the anticipation of the unknown. The day had been filled with the usual banter and laughter of old friends reunited, but the previous night's encounter had left an unspoken tension hanging over their camp. They had decided to stay together for dinner, the aroma of roasting marshmallows and sizzling burgers mixing with the earthy scent of the forest floor. Alex, the most intuitive of the three, kept glancing at the tree line, her eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of the mysterious figures they had seen twice before. Ryan, ever the skeptic, tried to lighten the mood with jokes and tall tales from their college days, while Jamie, the designated organizer of the trip, was lost in thought, flipping through the pages of her guidebook as if it held the answers they sought. As the light grew scarce, the forest around them grew more animate. The rustling of leaves and the distant calls of nocturnal creatures grew louder, more insistent. And then, there they were again, the figures dressed as hunters, emerging from the trees like ghosts from a forgotten time. Their movements were deliberate, almost ceremonial, as they approached the camp. This time, they didn't vanish. Instead, they moved closer, their faces obscured by the flickering firelight, yet the intensity of their gaze unmistakable. The friends froze, their laughter dying in their throats. The figures paused, seemingly watching the trio with a strange curiosity. Alex's hand tightened around her flashlight, her thumb hovering over the button. Ryan broke the silence, his voice shaking slightly. Hello." The figures didn't respond, but their leader, a tall, stoic man, nodded almost imperceptibly. The three friends exchanged glances, their hearts racing in their chests. The hunters remained at the edge of the light, their forms just discernible through the veil of smoke and shadow. They didn't advance, but their presence was a silent warning. Jamie spoke up, her voice firm but trembling. "We don't mean any harm. We're just camping for the weekend. We'll leave you alone if you leave us alone." The leader's eyes remained fixed on them, and for a moment, it seemed as though he might step into the light. But then, as if on cue, the group retreated into the woods, disappearing as suddenly as they had appeared. The friends sat in stunned silence, the air thick with unspoken fear. It was clear that the figures were not mere figments of their imagination or harmless wanderers. They had to take action. They decided to take turns keeping watch throughout the night. Their trusty flashlights and a makeshift spear made from a branch and a knife their only defense against the shadows. The night was long and fraught with tension. Each friend took their turn, the fire casting shifting patterns on their faces as they stared into the abyss of the forest. The crackling of the firewood and the occasional snapping of a twig was the only sound to keep them company. During Alex's shift, she swore she heard whispers carried on the wind, the same whispers that had haunted her the night before. Her skin prickled with goosebumps, but she kept her post, scanning the darkness with a steely resolve. On Jamie's watch, she ventured a little too close to the shrine they had found earlier in the day. In the moon's soft glow, she noticed something new, a small piece of parchment with writing she didn't recognize, bound with a leather strap. Her curiosity piqued. She took it back to the camp, careful not to disturb the offerings. The paper was brittle and aged, the ink faded. The symbols and words danced in front of her eyes, hinting at a long-forgotten ceremony. The hours dragged on, each tick of the clock echoing through the camp like a taunt. They took comfort in the warmth of the fire, the flames licking the night sky like a living barrier against the encroaching darkness. As the first light of dawn pierced the canopy, the friends gathered around the fire, exhausted but unharmed. They shared their experiences of the night, their voices hushed with the weight of the unspoken. Jamie revealed the parchment, and together they tried to piece together the puzzle. The symbols matched those they had found etched into the trees, and the language seemed ancient, possibly a dialect of a local tribe that had once inhabited the area. The sun rose, casting its golden fingers through the leaves. The forest awoke, the sounds of life returning to the woods. But the friends couldn't shake the feeling that they were still being observed, that the hunters had not abandoned their vigil. As they packed up their camp, the whispers grew louder, the shadows seeming to shift and twist. The friends moved quickly, their eyes darting around, searching for any sign of the mysterious group. As they were about to leave, the hunters appeared once more, blocking their path. This time, their eyes were not curious, but cold, their intent clear. Alex stepped forward, her flashlight beam steady on the leader. "We're leaving now," she said firmly. "We don't want any trouble." The leader spoke, his voice a low rumble that seemed to resonate through the very earth beneath them. "You've seen what you shouldn't have. You've disturbed the balance." Ryan stepped up beside Alex, his voice shaking. "We didn't know. We're sorry. We'll leave and never come back." The leader paused, his gaze lingering on the parchment in Jamie's hand. Then, with a gesture that seemed almost reluctant, he stepped aside, allowing them to pass. As they hurried away, the leader called out in a language none of them understood, his words carrying a haunting melody that seemed to weave into the very fabric of the forest. The trees whispered back, a chorus of ancient secrets. The friends didn't look back as they hiked through the woods, their steps quick and panicked. When they finally reached the edge of the forest, they paused, gulping in the sweet, clean air of the outside world. They had escaped the hunters and the shadowy world they had stumbled upon, but the memory of those piercing eyes and the unspoken promise of consequences would linger, a reminder that some mysteries are best left untouched. Back in the safety of their cars, they drove away from the forest, the whispers and shadows fading into the rearview mirror. Yet, the questions remained, echoing in their minds like the calls of the night creatures they had left behind. What were the hunters? What ceremony had they disturbed? And what fate had they narrowly avoided? Over the next few weeks, the friends found themselves drawn back to the parchment, deciphering its cryptic language. The story it told was one of protection, of a pact made long ago between the forest and its guardians. They realized that their trip had been more than just an escape from reality. It had been a brush with the supernatural, a lesson in respect for the sacred. The experience had changed them, their friendship forged anew in the crucible of fear and wonder. They had faced the unknown together, and come out the other side, forever bound by the secrets they had uncovered in the heart of the woods. In the quiet of their own homes, each of them felt the pull of the forest, the whispers that had followed them home. They knew that one day, they would have to go back, to set things right, to face the shadows they had stirred. The screen fades to black, leaving the audience with a final, haunting image, the hunter's leader, watching them from the forest edge, his eyes gleaming with an unspoken promise. The moon casts a silver glow through the thick canopy of leaves above, painting the forest floor with a patchwork of shadows and light. Alex's heart hammers in her chest as she stirs from her half-slumber, the sound of distant footsteps echoing in the night. She sits bolt upright, her eyes straining to pierce the darkness beyond the campfire's flickering embers. The hairs on the back of her neck stand on end as she catches the faintest whisper of movement at the edge of their makeshift camp. Her eyes widen as she discerns the unmistakable silhouettes of the figures they had encountered before, the hunters. Also they had assumed. The fire crackles and pops, sending sparks into the air like tiny embers of panic. Alex's breath catches in her throat as she realizes the gravity of the situation. With trembling hands, she gently nudges Ryan and sleeping soundly beside her. "Guys," she whispers urgently, "they're back." Ryan stirs, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. "What's going on?" he murmurs grudgingly. Jamie, ever the skeptic, sighs heavily. "Alex, you're just..." "Look," Alex hisses, pointing into the woods. The figures emerge from the shadows like specters, their forms silhouetted against the moonlit foliage. They're closer this time, much closer. The trio watches in horror as the hunters, if that's indeed what they are, begin to advance slowly, deliberately, toward their camp. The air grows colder, the silence deafening except for the crunch of leaves under their methodical steps. "We need to go," Alex says, her voice barely above a whisper. Now, Ryan and Jamie, now fully alert, spring into action. They frantically pack up their gear, their eyes never leaving the approaching figures. Each rustle of fabric and clink of metal seems to resonate through the forest like a siren's call. The tension is palpable as they struggle to remain silent, their breaths coming in shallow gasps. The figures draw nearer, their faces obscured by the shadows cast by their hoods. The friends can feel their eyes upon them, watching, waiting. "Let's get out of here," Ryan says, his voice low and urgent. "We can't outrun them in the dark." Jamie nods, her hands shaking as she stuffs their last few supplies into her backpack. "But where do we go?" Alex's eyes dart around the camp, searching for any clue, any escape route. "Back to the river," she suggests. "We can follow it back to the car." They quickly agree, their movements now synchronized by fear. They sling their packs over their shoulders and tiptoe away from the dying fire, the flaming embers casting a warm glow on their tense faces. The figures in the woods don't break their stride, matching the friends step for step, their intentions still unknown. The underbrush snatches at their legs as they navigate the forest, the darkness seemingly closing in around them. The river's distant murmur acts as a beacon of hope, guiding them through the maze of trees. The sound of the water grows louder, a promise of safety, of civilization, of an end to this nightmare. But the hunters are relentless. They don't shout or give chase, they simply follow, their presence a constant, terrifying reminder that they are not alone in the wilderness. The friends quicken their pace, the branches and roots of the forest seemingly reaching out to trip them up in their haste. As they stumble upon the river's edge, the moon dips behind a cloud, plunging the world into darkness. The figures stop, their silhouettes now lost in the blackness. The friends exchange panicked glances, their hearts racing. For a moment, it seems as though they might have shaken them off. Then, a low air, sending a shiver down their spines. It's a sound that seems to resonate from the very earth beneath them, a primal call that seems to beckon the shadows themselves to come alive. The forest erupts into a cacophony of sound, branches snapping, leaves rustling, and the unmistakable thud of many footsteps closing in from all sides. The trio realizes with a sickening jolt that they are surrounded. "This way," Alex whispers, pointing upstream. "Maybe we can lose them." They wade into the icy water, the current tugging at their legs. The river whispers secrets of its own, a soft lullaby of fear and uncertainty. They keep their heads low, their eyes scanning the banks for any sign of the hunters. As the moon emerges from behind the clouds, they spot a faint light in the distance, a beacon through the trees. The hope of rescue propels them forward, their breaths coming in ragged gasps as they fight the river's pull. The light grows stronger, and they can make out the shape of a cabin, a sanctuary from the night's horrors. They stumble out of the water, their clothes clinging to their shivering bodies, and race toward the cabin. Inside, the cabin is sparse but warm. A single candle casts flickering shadows across the wooden walls, and the smell of decay hangs heavy in the air. They barricade the door with whatever they can find: chairs, a table, their packs. The chanting grows louder outside. The footsteps closer. They huddle together, their eyes wide with fear, as the hunters encircle the cabin. The wooden walls seem paper-thin, the chants a muffled roar that penetrates the very fabric of their sanity. In the candlelight, they share nervous glances, their breaths coming in short bursts. They know they can't stay here forever. They need a plan. What do we do? Jamie asks, her voice trembling. Ryan's eyes dart around the room, searching for anything that might serve as a weapon. We fight, he says, his voice steely with determination. Alex clutches a flashlight, her hand shaking. We can't fight them. We don't even know what they want. The chanting reaches a crescendo, the figures pounding on the cabin door in time with their sinister rhythm. The wood groans under the pressure, the hinges straining. The friends huddle closer, their hearts pounding in unison with the relentless beat outside. And then, as suddenly as it began, the noise stops. The forest is once again enveloped in a suffocating silence. They wait, their ears straining for any sound. The candle flickers, casting macabre shadows across their faces. Slowly, the realization dawns on them. The hunters are gone. The cabin is still, the only sound the ticking of a clock on the wall, a reminder of the world they left behind. They share a collective sigh of relief, their bodies sagging with the weight of their fear. What do they do now? What secrets does this cabin hold? And what lies in wait for them outside when the sun rises? Exhausted and traumatized, they settle into an uneasy sleep, the candle burning low. As the first light of dawn seeps through the cabin windows, the shadows retreat, but the memory of the night walkers lingers, a chilling reminder that their weekend retreat has become something far more sinister. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a feeble silver glow over the dense canopy of the forest as the three friends, Alex, Ryan, and Jamie, hurried through the underbrush, their hearts pounding in their chests like a tribal drum. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and pine, a stark contrast to the sterile environment of their college dorms. "They're still behind us," Alex gasped, her breath coming in short, ragged bursts. Her eyes darted back and forth, trying to pierce the inky blackness that surrounded them. The figures from before, those silent, relentless hunters, had emerged from the shadows once more, their intentions as cryptic as the symbols they had discovered etched into the trees earlier that day. Ryan, the most athletic of the group, took the lead, navigating the treacherous terrain with surprising grace despite the weight of his fear. "Keep moving," he urged, his voice tight with tension. "We can't let them catch us." Jamie, the one who had arranged a camping trip, brought up the rear, glancing over her shoulder every few seconds. The flickering campfire light played across her face, highlighting the sheen of sweat and the stark terror in her eyes. "Why are they following us?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Their footsteps grew louder, a cacophony of snapping twigs and rustling leaves that seemed to echo through the night. The group of friends had been chased from their campfire, their earlier bravado evaporated like the last embers of their fire. The eerie silence that had once been their companion had transformed into a symphony of fear, each sound a potential threat. As the trio stumbled through the woods, their eyes fell upon a beacon of hope, a cabin, long abandoned, nestled in a small clearing, its once white paint peeled away like the skin of a rotting corpse, revealing the raw, splintered wood beneath. The windows were shuttered, the door a mere plank of wood hanging on by one rusty hinge. Without a moment's hesitation, they dashed towards the cabin, the pursuers' footsteps growing ever closer. They barricaded the door with a heavy table, their breaths coming in desperate gasps. Inside, The air was stale and thick with dust, but the walls felt like a sanctuary against the malevolent presence that lurked outside. The cabin's single room was sparsely furnished with remnants of a past life: a moth-eaten couch, a dusty bookshelf, and a rickety table with 3 chairs. In the corner, a stove stood cold and silent, its pipes long ago ransacked by scavengers. The historical documents they found were yellowed with age, the ink faded to a sepia brown. A time when the forest was sacred, a place where the original inhabitants conducted ancient rituals to appease the gods of the woods. The language was archaic, the handwriting spiny, but the illustrations of the rituals sent shivers down their spines. The figures depicted were eerily similar to the ones that pursued them, dressed in animal skins and carrying ceremonial weapons. "We need to find out what's going on," Alex murmured, her voice barely audible above the thumping of their hearts. She picked up one of the documents, her eyes scanning the page with a desperate intensity. "Maybe there's something here that can explain this." Ryan and Jamie exchanged a look, the gravity of the situation weighing heavily on their shoulders. They had stumbled into a story much older than themselves, one that seemed to be playing out around them with terrifying clarity. As they pored over the documents, the cabin began to feel less like a shelter and more like a prison. The walls seemed to close in, the darkness outside pressing against the windows like an unseen force. The floorboards creaked and groaned, as if the very structure was alive and aware of their presence. The document spoke of a time when the balance between the natural world and the human one was maintained through offerings and rituals. The forest had a spirit, and it demanded respect. Those who dared to enter without permission faced the wrath of the night walkers, the ghostly figures that were now their pursuers. The realization dawned on them like the first light of dawn. They had unwittingly trespassed on sacred ground. The hunters were not human, but the guardians of the forest, summoned by some unseen transgression. Their panic grew as the sounds outside grew more frenzied. The night walkers were no longer content to merely follow. They were now surrounding the cabin, their whispers and chants a mournful symphony that seemed to beckon the friends deeper into the madness. In a fit of desperation, Alex found a page detailing an ancient ceremony to appease the forest spirits. It spoke of a ritual requiring a token of respect from each trespasser, something personal and meaningful, to be left at the base of the oldest tree in the woods. They gathered their most treasured possessions, a necklace from Ryan's late grandmother, a locket from Jamie's childhood, and a journal filled with Alex's deepest thoughts, and approached the door with trembling hands. They stepped out into the cold embrace of the night, the moon now obscured by a tapestry of thick, ominous clouds. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as the night walkers closed in. With a shared nod, they sprinted towards the ancient tree, the air thick with the scent of rain and the electric charge of an impending storm. As they reached the tree, the whispers grew to a crescendo, the figures of the night walkers now visible in the gloom. They placed their offerings at the base of the gnarled trunk, their eyes fixed on the spectral figures that surrounded them. For a moment, the world held its breath. The storm above mirrored the chaos in their hearts, the thunder a bass note to the symphony of their fear. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the whispers ceased. The figures began to recede, melting into the shadows like mist. Exhausted and trembling, the friends watched as the night walkers disappeared into the darkness, leaving them alone in the clearing. The storm broke, and the rain began to fall in a gentle, cleansing cascade, washing away the dust of the cabin and the fear that clung to their clothes. They huddled together, their eyes never leaving the spot where the night walkers had been. "What now?" Jamie asked, her voice small in the vastness of the night. Ryan, his eyes never leaving the tree, whispered, "We stay until dawn, and then we leave, never to return." The hours passed in a blur of rain and shivering, the three friends clinging to each other for warmth and comfort. As the first light of day began to peek through the treetops, the forest seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The night walkers were gone, the danger, for now, had passed. They emerged from the cabin, the rain now a gentle patter against the leaves, and made their way back to civilization, forever changed by their encounter with the unexplained. The experience had bonded them in a way that no college prank or heart-to-heart could ever match. The end of their weekend retreat was marked not by the laughter and camaraderie they had anticipated, but by a silent, solemn vow never to speak of the night walkers or the ancient ritual they had witnessed. They packed their gear and left the forest, the echoes of whispers and the rustling of leaves fading into the distance. Back in the safety of their dorm room, the three friends sat in silence, the weight of their experience too heavy to be broken by words. They had faced the unknown and survived, but at what cost? The forest had claimed a piece of them, a piece they could never get back, and as the days turned to weeks, and the weeks to months, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were still being watched, that the whispers of the night walkers followed them wherever they went. The line between reality and nightmare had been blurred, and they knew that the next time they ventured into the woods, they would never be the same. The cabin stood silent and foreboding, its aged wooden planks creaking under the weight of secrets long buried. Alex, Ryan, and Jamie huddled inside, their eyes wide with terror and disbelief. The flickering candlelight cast dancing shadows on the walls, mirroring the erratic rhythm of their racing hearts. The historical documents they had found lay scattered across the dusty table, each page revealing a piece of the grisly puzzle that had ensnared them. The room grew colder as the night deepened, and the moon's glow through the cabin window grew dimmer, hinting at the impending solar eclipse. The documents spoke of an ancient rite conducted by the region's original inhabitants, a ritual meant to appease the gods of darkness that would consume the world during the eclipse. The trio had unwittingly become part of a macabre dance that had not been performed in centuries. Alex picked up one of the pages, her trembling hand brushing against the brittle parchment. It says here that the eclipse is a time of transition, a bridge between the worlds of the living and the dead, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind's mournful howl. Ryan leaned in, his eyes scanning the faded script. They believed that sacrificing outsiders would grant them protection during the eclipse. Jamie, his voice a mix of dread and fascination, added, "It's like we're living in some twisted episode of Ancient Aliens." They had thought the cabin would offer them refuge from the unseen pursuers, but it had instead become a prison of knowledge, each revelation more disturbing than the last. The document spoke of a prophecy that foretold the arrival of three strangers who would bring forth the eclipse's wrath. The friends exchanged uneasy glances, the gravity of their situation weighing heavily upon them. They were the strangers the prophecy had warned of, and the eclipse was only hours away. The night grew restless, and the air thick with anticipation. The friends took turns keeping watch, their eyes peeled to the windows and the door, which had begun to rattle with the increasing ferocity of the wind. The fireplace crackled, sending embers flying into the darkened room, briefly illuminating the fear etched on their faces. As the first hint of dawn approached, the cabin's walls seemed to pulse with an eerie energy. The once faint whispers grew louder, echoing through the night like a chorus of lost souls. The floorboards groaned, and the cabin's structure itself seemed to shift, as if the very earth beneath them was coming alive. Alex, on the final watch, noticed a peculiar change in the air. The whispers grew clearer, more urgent. They formed a chant, a call to the ancient forces that had been disturbed by their presence. "Guys," she murmured, nudging Ryan and Jamie awake. "They're coming." The two men stumbled to their feet, their eyes scanning the room for anything that could serve as a weapon. They had lost all sense of time, their only guide the relentless march of the shadows outside. The door burst open with a deafening crack, and the cabin was filled with the silhouettes of the mysterious figures. They moved with a predatory grace, their eyes gleaming with a feral intensity that made the friends' blood run cold. Each figure was adorned with a ghastly mask made from the skins of animals, their eyes peering through the holes like twin pools of blackness. The group of friends retreated to the far corner of the cabin, their backs pressed against the cold, unyielding logs. The figures circled them, the chanting growing louder, the air electric with malice. Alex, her mind racing, grasped for any thread of hope. "The documents," she whispered. There must be a way to stop this. Ryan nodded, his eyes scanning the pages scattered on the floor. It mentions a counter-ritual, but it's incomplete. The figures grew closer, their movements synchronized with the pounding of their hearts. The friends had only moments before they would be at the mercy of the ritualists. Desperation fueled their resolve, and they began to recite the fragmented incantation they had found. The words felt ancient on their tongues, alien and powerful. The figures surrounding them paused, their chant faltering, as the air grew thick with the sense of something ancient and unsettling. The wind outside grew to a crescendo, and the cabin trembled on its foundation. A sudden flash of light pierced the cabin's gloom, and the friends squinted as the first rays of the sun began to break through the eclipse's embrace. The figures grew restless, their masks quivering as the power of the eclipse waned. The friends continued the counter-ritual, their voices growing stronger, each syllable resonating with the power of the dawning light. The cabin's walls began to glow with an ethereal light, pushing back the shadows that had consumed the room. The leader of the group, a figure dressed in the pelt of a giant bear, stepped forward, raising a hand adorned with the bones of small animals. "You dare to defy the eclipse's embrace," he bellowed, his voice resonating with a supernatural depth. Jamie, his voice shaking, held up the last page of the manuscript. "We offer ourselves not as sacrifices, but as guardians of the balance between worlds." The bear-like figure paused, its eyes narrowing behind the mask. The air grew still, and the whispers of the other figures grew softer, their movements less certain. The light grew stronger, and with it, the friends felt a surge of hope. The bear man lowered his hand, the tension in the room dissipating like mist in the morning sun. The chant of the figures grew weaker, and one by one, they turned away, retreating into the forest from which they had come. The friends, exhausted and overwhelmed, watched as the figures disappeared into the brightening woods. The eclipse had passed, and the sun began to rise in earnest, casting the cabin in a warm, golden light. They emerged from the cabin, their eyes blinking against the sudden brightness. The woods had transformed, the once ominous trees now bathed in a tranquil glow. The offerings at the shrine had vanished, leaving only a faint trace of their existence. They packed their gear and left the cabin behind, the experience forever etched into their memories. As they hiked back to civilization, they talked in hushed tones about what they had witnessed. They had survived the eclipse, but they knew that the world was not as they had once believed it to be. The final scene showed the trio standing at the edge of the forest, looking back at the cabin, now just a speck in the distance. "We can't tell anyone about this," Jamie said, his voice solemn. Alex and Ryan nodded in agreement. They had glimpsed the fabric of reality unraveled, and seen the horrors that lurked just beyond the veil. They had faced the awakening and lived to tell the tale. But the story of the eclipse would remain their secret, a chilling reminder of the ancient forces that still held sway. As they disappeared into the horizon, the camera panned back to the cabin, now shrouded in shadows once more. The whispers grew faint, the echoes of the ritual fading into the fabric of the forest. Yet, the land held its breath, waiting for the next eclipse, when perhaps the awakening would come again. The moon slithered its way across the sun's face, casting an eerie twilight over the forest. The air grew thick with anticipation, charged with an energy that sent shivers down the spines of Alex, Ryan, and Jamie. They huddled together in the cabin, the only bastion of safety they could find in the heart of the ancient woods. The documents they had discovered spoke of a solar eclipse that would stir the slumbering spirits, awakening them to claim their sacrifices. The trio sat around the flickering candlelight, their faces etched with worrying. Alex clutched a dusty journal, her eyes scanning the pages for answers. "Alex," whispers the eclipse, "it's tonight. We need to find a way to stop this before it's too late." Jamie: "But how? We don't even know what we're dealing with." The cabin's floorboards creaked under their nervous pacing. They had tried to fortify the doors and windows as best they could, but the feeling of being watched grew more intense with each passing minute. The first tremor of the eclipse's power rattled the windows. The friends exchanged worried glances as the candle flames danced wildly. Ryan peeked through a crack in the boarded-up window. The forest had grown eerily quiet, as if the very trees held their breath. The silence was shattered by the distant sound of drums, beating in rhythm with their racing hearts. The cabin walls seemed to pulse with the ancient cadence. The figures emerged from the woods, their silhouettes stark against the dimming light. The friends watched in horror as the shadows grew more solid, morphing into the forms of twisted, grotesque hunters. The eclipse reached its zenith. The room grew cold, the air crackling with energy. The hunters circled the cabin, their eyes gleaming with a predatory intent. Suddenly, the cabin door burst open. The friends were torn apart by unseen forces, thrown into the cold embrace of the eclipse's night. Separated, each friend faced a personal horror tailored to their deepest fears. Alex found herself in a sea of mist, surrounded by the faceless figures of her past regrets. Alex screams, "No, leave me alone." Her voice echoed through the trees, a desperate plea to the whispers that grew louder, the shadows that grew bolder. Ryan stumbled through a maze of twisted branches, pursued by the spectre of a lost loved one. The ghostly figure beckoned him closer, a chilling smile playing on its lips. Jamie was in a clearing, her fear of failure manifesting as a giant, looming shadow that threatened to swallow her whole. The friends' screams intertwined, each fighting their own battle, as the supernatural forces grew stronger. The hunters' chanting grew louder, the drums more insistent. The eclipse began to wane, the light seeping back into the world. The friends realized that, if they didn't act soon, they would become permanent offerings to the ancient ritual. Alex whispers to herself, "We can't let this happen. We have to find each other and disrupt this ritual." Guided by the fading whispers of their fears, the friends stumbled through the forest, their determination stronger than their dread. As the final sliver of light returned, the friends found themselves standing before an ancient stone altar, the hunters poised to strike. The hunters paused, their eyes glowing with a malicious anticipation. The friends had to act fast. "We're not part of your ritual. We don't belong here." The hunters advanced, their movements jerky and unnatural. The friends grabbed whatever they could from the altar and threw it into the surrounding woods, disrupting the sacred space. The hunters howled in fury as the supernatural forces dissipated. The forest's normal sounds returned, the night air warming. The friends stumbled back to the cabin, exhausted and shaken, their clothes torn and their hearts racing. They collapsed inside, the cabin feeling more like a prison than a shelter. The eclipse had ended, but their ordeal was far from over. They pieced together the journal's clues, discovering a disturbing connection between their own lives and the ritual. Alex, shocked, "We were chosen. We're descendants of the people who betrayed the forest spirits." Jamie, "We have to put this right. We need to perform a counter-ritual to lift the curse." The friends ventured into the forest once more, their newfound knowledge guiding them to the heart of the ceremony. They faced the enraged hunters, now less human and more like malevolent spirits bound to the forest. Alex, firmly, "We reject your claim on us. We offer peace and balance in place of fear." The hunters paused, their forms flickering. The friends worked together, performing the counter-ritual with the items they had gathered from the cabin. The air grew still, the candles they held burning brighter. The hunters' forms wavered, their grip on the mortal world weakening. With a final, desperate cry, the spirits dissipated into the forest, leaving the friends trembling in the moonlit clearing. Their fears had been conquered, the ritual disrupted. But the question remained, what other secrets did the verdant veil hold? The friends held each other tightly, their eyes reflecting the light of the dawning sun. They had survived the eclipse, but at what cost? "Jamie, we can't tell anyone about this. It's our burden to bear." Alex nods, "But we're in this together. We'll find a way to make it right." The camera pulls back, revealing the cabin in the distance, surrounded by the seemingly peaceful forest. But the whispers in the wind hinted at the truth. The verdant veil had been lifted, and nothing would ever be the same. The friends set off, their footsteps echoing through the woods. The story ends on a cliffhanger as Alex, Ryan, and Jamie face the culmination of the ritual's power. Their friendship is tested, and they must rely on their wits and courage to escape the malevolent grasp of the ancient spirits that have claimed the woods. The episode leaves viewers with haunting questions about the true nature of the hunters and what lies beneath the verdant veil of the forest. Thank you so much for joining me on this cinematic journey. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. Have you experienced a spine-chilling horror that left you trembling? Share your terrifying tale with us by emailing nightmarenetwork@hotmail.com, and we'd be thrilled to feature it on our platform. Until next time, happy movie watching.